right. My name is Samuel Ajman, and I will be moderating the program for this morning. I'm sure that some of us have been in the past meetings where we've discussed extensively some of the advantages, the opportunities of Ghana's energy transition plan. Quite a number of such discussions have taken place. We've had extensive discussions and gotten to know the enormous opportunities and advantages. This morning we have the task to look at the opportunities for accelerating financial investment for Ghana's energy transition plan. It's a big task, but we're all going to get involved and to find where we all need to be at the appropriate time. I will invite for the opening remarks a senior research consultant with IMANI Centre for Policy Education, senior research consultant, Mr. Amprofi Ajeman. Let's put our hands together and welcome him, please.
Thank you very much, my namesake. Good morning to you, distinguished invitees and good stakeholders of the whole energy space in Ghana. I'd like to first acknowledge the immense contribution from the Climate Compatible Growth, the CCG, which is an initiative of the FCDO of the UK. They have made this possible. This happens to be the first in a series of a number of dialogues related to the current project that IMANI Africa is running with the CCG. And at the end of the whole entire project, what we seek to do is to understand not only the policy reforms which are necessary for us to unlock both public and private financing for our energy transition plan, but also how we can identify clean, bankable projects in relation to that, plus how we can make all stakeholders aware and participate in relation to the issue. So that is why we are having the dialogue today. We would simply, not to waste much time, encourage a lot of participation from you, especially during the panel session that we'll be having after Doc Acheampong makes his presentation. But most importantly, we would like you to finish all the food that we serve today so that it won't go to waste. So welcome again, good morning, and have a very fruitful day. Thank you. Yeah.
Let's put our hands together once again for him. He gave us free advice, and it's a very important advice. Let's finish the food. The breakfast that's served, you can always get them back in here. We won't have breakfast again. Lunch is already served as well, which we can all enjoy during lunch. But you need that energy because we want to get involved and find answers and be able to meet our target for this morning. We are going to have a presentation on behalf of IMANI coming from Dr. Theo Acheampong, economist, political analyst, and senior fellow with IMANI. Let's put our hands together and welcome him, please.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, I can't hear you. Good morning. Please, you need more food. Yes. If we can, get some more food. Get the coffee, get the teas, and I saw some jollof or some rice thing at the back there as well. But it's a great privilege and pleasure to be here this morning for this important discussion. And I like to stand on the established protocols to welcome you all, but also to acknowledge our partners that we're working with on this project, the Climate Compatible Growth, which is a UK government funded project that attempts or wants to help countries in terms of leveraging the opportunities that the transition brings. And Ghana is one of the partner countries working on this. Related to that, with, okay. Just a moment, just connecting the pointer. So that kind of really sets the context, but for the rest of the conversation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the current economy and the challenges that we find ourselves in. Then I would talk a bit about the transition itself, what we're doing in Ghana in terms of the plan and the framework. And it would actually interest you to note that there's not only one energy transition plan in Ghana. There's actually two plans that have been issued in the last 2 years. So the first one, which is the Energy Transition Framework, which was actually authored by the Ministry of Energy, and then in 2022. And then in 2023, we also had the Energy Transition and Investment Plan, which was authored by the Ministry of Environment, Science, and Technology. There are a few differences between them, but for example, the Transition Framework envisions 2070 as the timeline in which Ghana becomes net zero, whereas the second one, the Transition and Investment Plan, is looking at 2060. And the range of energy choices that are available are also slightly sort of different, but at least they also converge on one thing, which is that you need in excess of $500 billion to actually deploy or meet those targets. Again, for context, Ghana's economy, so if you take all the things that we produce in the country and you translate it into the gross domestic product, GDP, as of 2022 or even 23, it was just about $75 billion, okay? So if you need, for argument's sake, 540 billion to be able to deploy that, then you need almost 7 or 8 times of all of the wealth that we're producing in this country to actually, meet the net zero goals. So the question becomes, where are we going to find the money? Yeah, and that is why we're here and the conversation that we're going to have. But fundamentally, the point is that we have to reduce emissions in order to save the planet. And that means that we have to change the way we use and consume, energy. And you can think of it as the black bit here being the past and the colorful bit here being the future, right? The future being more solar, wind, and other renewable energy resources as part of the global, energy mix. This is not Ghana. This is at the global level. If we're to meet that 1.5 degrees Celsius target as set under the Paris Agreement. I mean, there's some other studies that actually indicate that we probably would not be able to do 1.5. Currently, we're in excess of 2.1 or 2.2 degrees Celsius. But for us to do that, the energy forms that we use have to change. So we possibly will be seeing more renewables in the mix. You're going to get more hydrogen and other newer energy forms coming into the mix. And then importantly, the share of fossil fuels, so oil, gas, coal, and other things would, have to come down. This is at the global level. And all countries have taken this sort of view into then producing different documents, especially the nationally determined contributions under the UN FFFC framework. So clearly something has to change. The question is, how do we change that from the perspective of Ghana? And importantly, if you've got to do that, then you actually need money. But for Ghana, we're in a position where we are fiscally constrained. And what I will do in the next few slides is to just, again, paint a picture or a story as the degree of the fiscal challenges that we face, and to the extent to which that could possibly hinder the financing of the transition in Ghana, but then eventually end up with some potential solutions or other creative financing sources that we can deploy. Okay, this is a bit of a busy chart, but I'll basically try to explain it in very simple terms. That from the early 2000s, the economy was growing or doing on average about 7%, right, growth rate a year, till we started oil production. And then post-oil production, things have not been going as great as we want. So we've had a series of crises, starting with the famous Doomsday crisis. We had the pandemic, and during the pandemic, we saw one of the lowest growth rates in the last 20 or so years. And just when we're recovering from the pandemic, you also, of course, have, the Russian-Ukraine war as well. But underlying this picture here is also the fact that if you actually look at how government raises money and spends money, there are serious gaps or deficits in terms of the financing. So basically, our expenditures does not match our revenue. In fact, if you take 3 line items in the budget, when you pay for employees, those on the government payroll, when you take the interest servicing costs, and then when you take the allocations that we make to the statutory funds, so your GET fund, district assembly, common fund, etc., those 3 line items consume all of your domestic revenue sources that you're raising. So there's very little left actually to even do other capital-related, investments. So by extension, often the government is forced to actually go to the market to borrow. There are question marks about what they use the money for. And some of us in the past, and still do, have raised serious questions about the monies and what they are used for. But the end product in the last few years basically is that we've become debt distressed, and we've had to renegotiate, right, our debt. I think just a few days ago, a statement came through from the Ministry of Finance saying that we finally concluded the bilateral debt restructuring with our bilateral creditors, and we still have got to restructure the external commercial debt, so the Eurobonds that need to be. But again, think of it. If you're struggling with your economy and your debt distress, how do you even raise money to finance the transition? And that becomes quite an important point, to note. And then, of course, related to that is, yes, we've gone to the IMF. This is our 17th time. If you take every 4 years as the political cycle, then since 1957, you take your 17, divide by the 66 or 67 years of nationhood, it means almost every 3.5 years, we're actually at the IMF for one program, or the other. And then, of course, the citizens clearly, feel the impact. So you see people out there protesting and asking, questions as to how their resources are being used and being utilized. The interesting thing when we were doing this work is we decided to actually go and look at all of our past IMF programs since 1957. So the documents are there. You can peruse it to actually see what are the common factors, right? The root causes. And we created a table, but basically if you take all the programs since 66, to 2024, there are basically 4 big issues, right, underpinning these persistent macro imbalances. External, the public debt issues, the balance of payments issues, and then the inflation-related issues. And you can almost see an example here. If you take the document that the IMF released in our last program in 2015, and you compare it to the document from our current program in 2013, you can almost, see word for word, right, the issues that consistently take us to the fund. So, for example, in 2015, it says that the program aims to restore debt sustainability and macro stability to foster a return to high growth and job creation while protecting social spending. Okay, fast forward 2023, when we signed. The program aims to restore the same thing, macro stability and debt sustainability, and issues include wide-ranging reforms to build, blah, 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 and it goes on and so forth. So you can see that we've got big problems, big structural issues that we've got to deal with. And in the context of the transition, which requires money to do, perhaps most of the flows that we're expecting wouldn't necessarily come from the government, but we need to look at other places. But it's important for us to understand the context within which the economy is operating and within which investment flows are supposed to come. So as a result, they've got the PCPEG program, which has basically 6 anchors for medium-term growth and stabilization. But you can see that a lot of the reforms that the government is pursuing really is around stabilizing the macroeconomy. The bit that interests me, and which is also important for this conversation, is this bit here about entrepreneurship, growth, and job creation. And this is where I think that if we're able to craft the climate conversation a bit more cleverly, then we could actually attract financing from even domestic sources, but importantly from external sources to help drive this growth and entrepreneurship, agenda going forward. Okay, so that sets the context of the economy. Now, how do we manage the transition in Ghana? And then we'll look at the financial flows and sources, and hopefully that sets us up going into the plenary for a very interesting and enriching discussion. Okay, so as many of us are aware, Ghana does not lack laws or policies. There's so many of them, and here is just a number of the policies and plans and the legal frameworks that we've got, to support and drive the transition in Ghana, including, investment facilitation in that regard. And then here is our attempt to capture the different government agencies and ministries that we think are core to the transition agenda, right, in the country. So, of course, you've seen the Ministry of Environment, EPA doing a lot of work, soon it to become an authority. I know there's a bill pending before Parliament that is expected to be passed during this session of Parliament before they rise for the election. Then you've got the Ministry of Energy with the different entities and the regulators, and then the Ministry of Finance that in recent times has actually set up a climate desk or unit meant to mobilize, additional resources and inflows into the country. Now, anchoring all of this is the new framework or frameworks that have been developed. So I did mention in my very initial remarks that there are 2 documents that speak to the energy transition in Ghana. The first one being the National Energy Transition Framework, 2022 to 2070. So this was led by local experts who worked on it, ran the models, ran the scenarios, and eventually produced this report with the president writing the foreword, and then there's a preface in the document by the Minister of Energy. Then subsequent to that, there's this Ghana Energy Transition and Investment Plan, which is 10-year shorter than this. So that goes up to 2060. But this was led by the Ministry of Energy, but it was supported by the SE for all. And again, the president wrote a foreword, and there's also a preface by the minister. And as we go along, I'll show you some of the differences or the gaps between this. So I had an investor approach me a month ago in a discussion in Paris, France, and it was like, Theo, which of these should we work with? Because it looks as though you've got two slightly different documents that have some similarities, but there are also some, right, differences as well. So for example, in the energy transition framework, this one makes a big emphasis with nuclear energy as part of the energy mix for Ghana starting 2050 onwards. This also does mention it, but it pushes more of the renewables and others, right, into the mix. And it does talk about nuclear energy, but it's not like bold on that going forward. I would encourage us, so these documents are all online, so you can actually just Google and download and find time and peruse it and digest them. But fundamentally, the point is that we've got to reduce our emissions. So these are the projections that we're looking at over the period, that our emissions would possibly peak by the late 2030s, and then it starts to sort of decline. And then if you break it down by sector, you have the transportation being a big driver, a big component of that going forward. So things like the electric vehicles and others will become quite important as part of the transition drive, going forward. So the question now becomes, okay, if this is what we envision, then what do we need to do to encourage more EV manufacturing, more use of, for example, our lithium resources to make precursor cells and battery components, right? Say in Ghana, and possibly even export after to the regional network. The end game is that by 2060-70, we should be reducing between 15 and 45% of our greenhouse, emissions. And like I said, in terms of money, you need over $500 billion to be able to do that. And that is as much as 7-8% of your current, GDP. And this is where the question becomes, where is the money going to come from? Or as a politician once said, nasikanoe, right? Okay, so a bit more detail here, just to show, if you break the plan down into components, so what we should be doing every year or every decade, you can see some bits of things that need to be done, but on transport, new cars, efficiency standards, we do quite a lot. We've got to do something also on clean cooking, and then on the power sector, a lot of solar PV and others coming in and eventually getting up to 26 gigawatts. So that's 26,000 megawatts of power by 2040. And then possibly you get some nuclear coming into the mix from the late 2040s, onwards. Okay. Similar thing here. And these are the technologies that we're going to be using, similar to the chart that I showed in the last but 2 slides. Okay. So now what I want to now finalize or end up on is, given what we know, so I've told 2 stories so far, that the economy itself is not in a position to actually self-finance most of these investments. Number 2, we've put in place at least a plan for the transition with different technologies that we're looking or envisioning. So the question now becomes, okay, where would the money come from? And that's what I want to wrap up my conversation on, and then we can open up the plenary and have our debate. Okay. When you look at climate flows more broadly in Ghana, a lot of the money is broadly coming in from bilateral and multilateral sources, right? So if you actually look at the government funding component of it, from the period 2011 to 19, we've not found any new data source as yet. So these figures could possibly change, but I don't think it would change that much. But overall, at a climate level, not energy, energy is part of climate, is that the government financing over the last decade has probably been just about 9%, right, of the total climate flows that we've been receiving, and that most of the funds have been coming in, externally, which again reflects the fact that we just don't have enough of the money domestically to be able to deploy to drive our climate and energy agenda, going forward. If you break down the investment requirements, so that 560 billion that I mentioned, if you break it down into sectors, where should the money go, you can actually see that almost about half of the resources that we need would actually go into the energy sector, right? So things to do with new power generation sources, and then there's a few others related to energy on upgrading your transmission and distribution systems, and then some other bits on road transportation and related matters in terms of that. So the biggest pot of money would have to go into the power sector as part of broader reforms in that context. And this is again a visual of where the monies will be going. But again, this is the inconsistencies that I highlighted, right? So in this original document, you can see 47% into power generation. But if you actually rework the numbers back and you looked at the new document, that envisages that actually a lot of the money should be going into transportation, right? So again, internal inconsistencies that I think is important to highlight, because how you then frame this fits into the type of investments that you'll be attracting. So if the emphasis is on this one here, then clearly you focus a lot more of your attention on getting power sector investment, right? But if the emphasis is on transport, for example, then the investment you're looking for is people to come and help you revamp your fleets and get EVs and get all sort of things, right, on the road. And it's one issue that we've highlighted or flagged in the report that we'll issue after we're done with the report. But our initial assessment was like, oh, hang on, how come you've got these two documents and you seem to have the aggregate figure is about right, but when you actually break it down into sectors, something doesn't seem to sort of add up, and it reflects maybe the priorities of either the ministry or whoever the authors were in that regard. But by and large, as you've seen with the climate flows here, a lot of the monies that we need, whether it's transport or whether it's power, would have to come from these external, right, sources. So the Multilateral Development Bank and some of our donor partners. So what I've actually done here, and I'm about wrapping up, is to actually separate the financing sources into two broad buckets with sub-themes. So financing from public sources, so public national and public international. So national meaning the bit that would be getting directly from the budget or from government support. the bid that our internal sovereign wealth fund, so for example, the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, gave the bid that we possibly could raise from our local capital markets, right? So you could float some green bonds and things like that. And then on the public international, you've got these players or actors within the space that we could leverage. And then on the private side, you've actually got private, call it national, and again, private international. So private national being the commercial banks and other financial institutions that are in the country and could offer loans and credit and other financial products. And then international, the private equity groups. And again, you've got international sovereign wealth funds and then the capital markets as well. And when I'm wrapping up, I'll make a strong case for why we should possibly be thinking about approaching the sovereign wealth funds even some more, because these have a lot of money at their disposal. So let me give you a practical case. So in Paris last month, one of the big ones, it's called Mazda. So they are run by the Abu Dhabi state entity. Now they are looking to invest in different renewable energy and other climate projects on the continent. But the guy said that they've got well over $2 or so billion of capital to deploy. So money is not the obstacle. However, they are interested in projects that have scale or scalability, right? So it's not just coming to do one small project here, a couple of megawatts here and all of that, but could we possibly think about bundling them up to allow them get the scale and the sort of returns that they are looking for to meet their shareholder needs? And I think that's one of the things that in the discussions I'd like to hear some more from yourselves about some of the challenges, but even, for example, a database or a portal where one can actually go. If I'm an investor and I want to invest in Ghana's climate sector, for argument's sake, I should be able to go on a portal or a place where some projects have already been pre-screened, pre-assessed, and I can reach out potentially to the funders, to the owners or would-be owners to start having those conversations with. A lot of the investors that I personally deal with are like, look, Theo, we've got other countries approaching us, and often they come in prepared. So they have an investment portfolio, a proposition of projects and products that is already available for us to start a conversation with. We don't want to do the legwork, as in come, spend time, run around, and chase people and find out where the opportunities are. If your governments and people are serious, then what they've got to do is really actually package, right, those projects and start approaching us, and then we can start talking, business. A lot of people assume it's the issue of de-risking the investment, given the country conditions and then other related things. And this is quite interesting because, again, you talk to the market players and someone would come, okay, so I've got, for argument's sake, $500 million, right? $500 million to deploy. And I have a choice to choose between Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Zambia, and South Africa. And the guy will ask you, why should I choose Ghana, right? And you can make all the arguments you want. Of course, as a national, you want the money to come to your country. But sometimes they do the hardcore analysis, and it comes to the fact that, look, you've got serious issues, for example, with your currency. The guy is doing the project. He's probably selling it in cedis, and he has to convert, right, back into dollars and repatriate the profit. And when your exchange rate has been, doing yo-yo over the last couple of years, it raises serious issues for them as to whether or not they would want to consider investing in your country. So they will say, okay, politically, maybe Ghana is great compared to some of the other peers. But then they begin to look at other factors, right, that drives the investment, like currency or credit risk or liquidity, and other operational issues. And then the other bigger one, who is actually going to be the off-taker for the project. If I'm going to deal or work with, let's say, ECG in Ghana, and you look at ECG's finances and all the challenges that you've got serious issues there as your potential off-taker. Unless, of course, the government is prepared to offer you a sovereign guarantee, right, for the project. But under the IMF project, under the IMF program, and even past program, the idea of a guarantee is even a non-starter in terms of the conversation. So these are some of the real, challenges that often, when I personally engage with market participants and investors, it comes up consistently, over the time. And this is just example of the ECG thing and the big indebtedness that you've got, like in your energy sector. So I said, if you look at the first plan, almost 40% of the money has to go into power sector. But you've got a power sector in the country that is almost on its knees, right? Saddled with a lot of debt issues. And this just shows you, over the last few years, the amount of indebtedness that you got in the sector. I think the total is well over 7.8 or 7.9 billion, right? And so if you're an investor and you want me to come and help you meet your transition plan, of which changing your power sector and all of that is a core part, how do I deal with this issue? Am I going to get my money back when I, put or make the investment, given all the challenges that? So we've got to do part of our homework, that investors have options to play with, and not until you've done your homework and they feel comfortable enough to want to come into your country. You could have all the beautiful plans that you want, but we may struggle to actually attract the financing that we need. Last but one, and then I would wrap up. So again, you look at the document that we submitted to the UN framework for climate change, UNFFC. And within that document, the nationally determined contributions, there are some actions that we want to take between 2020 and 2030, and there were some costings around them, mitigation, adaptation, and all of that. Now, if I tie this back to the energy transition plan and the framework, one of the things that people again ask is, okay, you've got this thing here. How do we translate them into actual, tangible, right, projects? Back to what I said earlier, you need some place, some portal, some avenue that says, okay, when it comes to low carbon electricity generation, maybe we have already 5 projects that we've screened, done the initial assessment, and we want to have a conversation with you as an investor to think about how you can come in to support that. But just having it on paper may not, translate into the gain. So to wrap up my opening remarks and comments here, I think that yes, the government has committed to doing its bit for the environment to reduce emissions. We need almost 8 times of our current GDP if we are to meet those net zero targets. But at the moment, there are constraints, and the challenges are around the economy itself, technical issues, policy issues that continue to hold back or delay some of the investments that we are looking for, and I've just listed a few of them there. But I don't think it's all lost. I think there are potential avenues to overcome some of them and attract more inflows. So I would leave you with maybe 4 thoughts. I think the 9% that has been coming from government to support the broader climate flows, we could actually get a little bit more if we take seriously the issue of reforming our public financial management systems. And part of the thing we're doing in this work is trying to cost, right, what extra potentially could be unlocked in terms of a share of GDP and translate that into actual, amount. But for argument's sake, if you're even able to unlock 1% additional incremental investment as a share of GDP, 1% of 74 billion gives us what? Somebody help me. Oh, please, let's make it snappy. 1% of 75 billion. 0.75, isn't it? Right. So that's 750 million, right? USD multiplied by the exchange rate. And that in itself is quite, right, a lot of money that can be used to support, for example, clean cooking, right, and other things in that regard. I think we have to also double that with the external funding sources. And I think our strategic focus and emphasis needs to be attracting more of the sovereign wealth funds that are outside of the jurisdiction. And this could come in the way of co-investment. So for example, Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, GIF, let's say, partner with Mazda of the UAE or somebody else to actually deploy and execute some of these projects in that. At the end of the day, the investor will only also come in if the economy is stable and delivering the goods. So again, some of the macro imbalances and sector issues. And I think the project viability improvement becomes important. So I think that having a portal or some place where we have some pre-screened projects, in other words, we've done a little bit of our homework before going to meet the investors, would actually help in attracting more investment inflow. So basically, this is what we've got to share with you, and we want to get your thoughts, your perspective on these, and then we'll take that and input that into the final report and then circulate it amongst yourself. Thank you very much.